Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ops Innovator Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Williams, and in this week's episode, I was joined by James Edmondson. James is an Enterprise Agile Coach at Scrum Inc., where he helps organizations and teams become more effective and deliver greater performance. He combines 2 decades of experience as a former Naval Officer with 6 years in the corporate sector, which means he has the experience of working collaboratively under pressure and with a character that inspires the very best out of high-performing teams in both operational and head office environments. I first met James when he was just starting his Agile journey, so it's exciting to be speaking with him and to find out where he's up to now. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with this week's Ops Innovator, James Edmondson. Hi, James. Welcome to the Ops Innovator Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Great to see you again, and thank you so much for having me here.
We're going to talk about structuring for agility and how the latest research on teams can help organize doing something like that, right? In a creative way or an innovative way. I first met you in Sydney. Gosh, I think we were just talking about, 8 years ago or something like that. It's been quite a while since we've spoken. So I'm really excited to hear what you've been up to and get your advice and insights on how we can help people help their businesses work better.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
All right. So before we launch into it, I mean, you've got this this experience you don't see a lot, or at least I don't come across a lot, about using your military background and tackling crisis using a military organizational model. So I'd love to know if you could share with our audience, what was that journey like for you, going from 20 years in the Navy to Enterprise Agile Coach, right? And how that background in the military might have shaped your approach to how you help companies become more nimble and more agile.
Well, great, powerful question, and it's a unique story for me. Obviously, I guess every story is unique. I mean, you and I connected, as you said, in 2015. I was serving with the Australian Navy back then, and I was working on a cultural change program looking at how the Australian Navy became more innovative. And it kind of back then kicked me off on that journey of actually there are ways of working that support agility and creativity and innovation and outcomes such as those, and there are ways of working which don't. And I think it's probably fair to say many more people experience the don'ts than the do's. And I think I got really curious about what is it that helps some organizations be, you could say agile, you could say creative, innovative, faster than the competitors, whatever. And I knew that my background in the Navy, I was a maritime warfare officer. And what does that mean? That means that I spent a lot of time at sea on frigates and destroyers and patrol boats and mine hunters. So great warships that go out to sea, deal with a complex environment such as the sea. If you then layer on warfare, and whether that's going to war, which thankfully doesn't happen very often, or training for war, which is highly complex, you're adapting to your environment quite a lot. So the way I was sort of trained and brought up as a naval officer lends itself to agility. I just didn't know that.
Okay.
It was many years later when, and I'll come on to the sort of this sort of inflection point for me, but that military background where you go to sea with a plan, but you know that the plan's not going to survive contact with the sea or the enemy or whatever. And so you realize you've got to iterate. And as a team, or a team of teams, depending on the size of the unit you adapt to what's going on. And I mean, I love the work of John Boyd and the UDA. So the observe, orientate, decide, and act with the feedback loops across the different areas. And in many ways, warships or aircraft, submarines, different military units kind of do that all the time, almost naturally. Like, what am I seeing? What does that mean? What's my assessment? What do I do? Let's do something, and let's see how that results. And then there's feedback on that, and let's continue. So I think the seeds were sown years ago, but it wasn't really until 2020 that I was introduced to Agile in the sense of the frameworks, the methodologies,
right.
And that's where I started to go, okay, so I've heard about this thing called Scrum, or I've heard about this thing called Safe or Nexus or Less or the other methodologies, and I went, okay, let's dig into that. And so that's kind of I guess that's answer your question there. That's sort of the military piece, but there was a catalyst which changed the direction of my career.
Okay.
And so if you want, I'll kind of go into that now if you want, and sort of talk about that sort of event. So I'd left the Australian Navy, and my family and I we came back to the UK 2017. I was a bit lost, I must admit. I had 20 years in the Navy, 21 years in the Navy. I joined when I was 19, straight out of school, straight to officer training college at Dartmouth in the UK.
Right.
And that's all I wanted to do when I was a youngster. So I went through this training, and I got to see it, and I had some great experiences. But by the time I got to my late 30s, I was married, 2 young kids, spending a lot of time at sea, and I just realised that I probably wanted to be at home a bit more, and also I wanted a second career where I have given myself a good opportunity to have a good good runway at the second career, not leave it too late. I was quite curious about what I could do, but that change was difficult, and I had a couple of failed starts. Good learnings. I ended up working in a large utility in the UK, a water company, and in the UK. The water companies privately owned, they're big corporate organizations, and I ended up in the transformation office in a change function, and that sort of seemed like a fairly good fit for me from a program and projects point of view, stakeholder engagement, benefits realization, that sort of stuff, and I did a couple of years in that role, and but it was February 2020 when, as we all remember, there was news coming out of Wuhan province of this. Of COVID-19, and I remember that incredibly vividly. I was running a workshop in our head office in the UK, and someone said, "Hey, look, the human resources director is really keen to talk to you." And I thought, "Oh, Scott, that's either good news or bad news."
Yeah, that's usually not a good thing when you get a message like that, is it?
Yeah, so I was like, oh, okay, what have I done? So I went down to the executive suite at lunchtime and found her, and she sat me down and said, "Look, we've got I'm a bit worried actually. We've got a problem. We've recently had a bit of a restructure. We've let a couple of people go, some senior people, and one of those senior people was the head of risk and resilience, and her number two was coming back slowly from maternity leave. So the risk and resilience function of the business, which was very well set up for dealing with things like main bursts and pollutions and similar sort of events for a water company, was lacking leadership. And so the HRD said, look, ordinarily I turn to that individual and say, look, can you kind of think about what COVID-19 might mean for Anglian Water, the company I was currently working at? And I said, okay, crikey, why me? And she said, well, look, you've got you're a steady pair of hands in a company, but you're a military guy and you surely can deal with crisis. And I was like, well, yeah, I guess so. Thinking to myself, I've never really had to deal with a pandemic before. But clearly, good corporate assistant. I said, yeah, sure, I'll do what I can. And her famous last words to me were, "Oh, don't worry, James, it'll be over soon. It'll be like an hour a week max."
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it wasn't like that, as we all know. And this was early February of 2020. So we gathered a small team, including the HRD, myself, and a couple of others, and we started to kick the tires and think, okay, what are the what if scenarios? What do we know? What do we don't know? And what do we need to do? And every time we met as a little group, we went, oh, we probably need that person. We probably need an internal comms representative, or we probably need someone from regulation, or whoever. Right? We started to add more and more people to this small working group, and as things started to get a bit more chaotic out there, as COVID grew and came to mainland Europe and all the rest of it, the uncertainty levels grew. And so we met daily then. And by sort of end of Feb, we had cases in the UK. I can't remember quite the timeline in Australia, but, that sort of, it ramped up really quickly. And suddenly my day job was this. And I remember sitting in the office going, and everyone around me was like, acting, they're interested in what's going on, but they're doing their normal stuff.
Right.
And I was literally 3 phones on my shoulders, emails like galore, running from meetings, trying to deal with all these questions about everything to do with the company and how we would deal in these situations. And I thought, this is ridiculous. And I there are about 25 people in this working group now, and I felt like I was doing all the work. And I guess I'd been trained as a warfighter to deal with uncertainty and deal with stressful situations. I felt quite stressed. And I thought to myself, well, if I feel stressed, then I imagine the organizations begin to get stressed. And I thought, we're not structured for this. We can deal with a burst water main. We can deal with a polluted reservoir. Right. But we're not structured for this pan-organizational thing. So I went down and found the HRD again. And I said, look, sorry to tell you, but I don't think this is going particularly well. And I illustrated the symptoms I've just, articulated to you. And I said, I just don't think we're set up for success here. And she looked at me and said, well, okay, well, what the hell do you recommend? And I said, well, look, give me 12 hours. This is the end of the day. Give me the night, and I'll come back tomorrow and I'll have a think about it. And so got home. Kids went to bed, sat down at the kitchen table, and thought to myself, well, what the heck am I going to do? What is my recommendation? And I looked at the list of names I had, these 25 people, and they represented almost every aspect of the business. I thought, okay, we got many parts of the business covered, right? And then I thought to myself, well, hang on, if I was back in the military, where would I be right now? And I thought, well, I'd be in a joint, so that's Army, Navy, Air Force all coming together. And that's kind of representative of the water company with water, customer services, water recycling, and other big departments.
Okay.
And in those joint headquarters, you have cells, and they're called J. So J stands for joint, and you have a number. So J1 is people, and J2 is operations, and it goes all the way from J1 through to J9, and J9 is sort of finance and legal. And I thought to myself, hang on, why didn't I just form up J cells? Why don't I just create J cells for the organization? And I sat there, I started to write names onto Post-it notes and thought, well, here, that guy, that woman, that guy, they're all HR business partners. They can be in J1, that's people. And let's chuck a couple of data dudes in there because there's going to be a lot of data-y stuff required for people. And let's maybe put a health and safety person in. Suddenly I've got a J cell. I've got a cross-functional team who are focused on one element of the puzzle. And I did that for 1 through the night. And then I sketched onto a piece of A3. And I started to draw lines between the cells and went, okay, well, those 2 cells need to talk quite a lot, maybe twice a day, maybe at 8 and maybe at 4. And maybe we all need to come together maybe at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or maybe at 8. And so I created what you call in the military a battle rhythm to bring these disparate groups together. I thought that would work. And I went back next morning and I briefed the HRD, and she said, look, I kind of get it, but I'm not sure. I think we need to talk this through with the CEO. And I said, yeah, sure, fine, let's do that. And so Friday, I remember the dates really well. Friday the 13th of March was the day we as a company were testing our work from home kit. So everyone was sent home from work. I was back in the head office trying to monitoring that. And during a lull in the action, I sat down with the CEO. He popped in and said, I've heard you reorganize our incident management structure. And I said, well, in some ways I have. And he goes, would you like to take me through it? And I was like, I would be delighted. And so I sat down with this A3 diagram. I think I did it on Visio or PowerPoint, whatever. And I took him through it for about 5 minutes, just like I have you there. And he looked at it and went, we need a way to talk to the shareholders, which I think we can do. Other than that, James, I think this is great. Let's give it a go. And so that was a Friday. And I spent a pretty busy weekend writing up a bit more detail on it, created some terms of reference for the different teams and cells. And on Monday morning, we rolled it out.
Wow.
No change communications, no change plan. Just, right, guys, this is what we're going to do. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we set those J cells. I set those J cells up. I got agreement for it. And we created these cross-functional and functional multi-team system using a military model that I purposely adapted for a civilian context.
You have this experience of setting things up in a way based upon some other things you've been exposed to in the military, and you had this idea. So I've seen this work over here. I'm going to take that concept and I'm going to apply it over here. Forget what you call it, right? Forget the framework, or forget it based on anything. It's just, I know that I've seen this work over here. I'm going to take that idea and I'm going to apply it over here. I've been quite vocal about saying that is an innovative mindset. You've taken a solution from one context and you've translated it to apply it to make things better in another context. That is innovation, right? Just plain and simple. So
Yeah.
I'd love to know.
I think so too.
Yeah. So from your perspective, I mean, what does it mean really to you to be innovative and to think creatively in your work, and specifically about, how organizations might come together, how people come together, how teams interact, and the whole architecture of the business? What does being innovative in your work mean to you? And you've given us an example of how you apply it, but how do other people start to apply that kind of thinking in their work?
So so part of my studying as a team coach, I came across the work of Richard Hackman and Ruth Wageman, and Richard Hackman's sadly passed away. He was a Harvard scholar in team effectiveness, and Ruth was his PhD student, I believe. She's gone on and she's still around. In fact, I'm meeting her next weekend after next, in Dublin to do my master practitioner team coaching course with her and a guy called Dr. Chris DeLoe, which I can't wait. They did some brilliant research. Well, I think it's brilliant. They were looking at why some teams are more effective than others, and the sort of the prevailing wisdom at the time was, it's all to do with peoples and behaviours. And if we, James and Scott, they're on a team and they don't seem to be getting on particularly well, let's bring a mediator in, or let's do some one-on-one coaching. Let's figure that out. They sort of discovered through a ton of research over many years that actually it's a bit more than that. And their proposition was, a team is a complex social system. So the behaviors are very, very difficult to predict and change and evolve and are dynamic. What you can do, however, is structure and set structures in place. And, their moniker effectively is structure drives behavior and behavior drives outcomes. So I love that. And I think that obviously I came across that study and that research and post the 2020 COVID event and J cells. But when I look back on that, I thought, well, what I did there was, yes, I radically repurposed J cells for a different organization. But fundamentally, what the J cells did is provide that structure. And it's a sort of a loose enough structure that kind of holds people safely and go, okay, we're J1, we're looking after people, but I can still talk to those guys. I can still reach over there and go, hey, we've got this gnarly problem with data and we need more help. We just happen to we're kind of clear on our roles and responsibilities. And Ruth's and Rich Hackman's work talk about these six conditions. If you get these 6 conditions in place structurally, your team is on a really good place.
Okay.
So I think you can apply that thinking, and I think you can apply it at team level, and I think you can apply it at organizational level. And I think that's what some of these structures do in the agile space. But I don't think you have to limit yourself to the agile methodologies necessarily, although they can be really, really useful. Yeah. And so that I think that way of thinking, say, look, let's put stuff in place like roles and responsibilities, team purpose, team size, things like that. You could say a team charter, but that helps it, but it's not the end goal. It gives that team or a team of teams, a group of teams, that sort of ability to fall back on it if they're getting into problems. And then I think that allows them to get creative and actually do stuff and come together and come up with novel ideas. So I think that, so structure drives behavior drives outcome. And there's a guy who's a bit of a mentor to me, and he's got a wonderful expression. He's been in business a long time, and he says, James, you can't scale out of chaos, right? and that really resonates with me. You get 2 or 3 people together smashing it. You want to go bigger and faster. You've got to get something in there that supports them, and doesn't constrain them, but does allow them to be, I guess, disciplined in some ways.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense?
It 100% makes sense, right? And that can't scale out of chaos is so true, isn't it? And the what you were talking about there around the structure, right, is so important, right? Because there's this, when you talk about business architecture, or in my work, mostly in operating model design, organizational design, right, fundamental transformation of businesses. There's this concept of, there's a difference between how you organize and how you operate, right? And usually what that means is organize is the org chart, right? The boxes with lines between them and things like that. And you can set that up really however you want. And there are lots of factors that influence that. And that's fine. That's one thing. But I think what you're talking about, and the really important part, is how you operate, which has nothing to do with necessarily how you organize. Yeah. How do you put people together or allow people to interact in the right way to achieve some purpose, and you mentioned outcomes earlier, right? Which is what it's all about. But it is about, if you get the right people, right, with the right vision, give them some empowerment, some context, give them the tools they need, put them together in the right way, that allows them to then go apply their creativity, their curiosity, and just do good work. And usually that's the one thing that makes people the happiest in their job, is that opportunity to just do good work and feel like they're making a difference. And that by supporting them with the right structure and leadership too, leadership is a strong part of that. But it's so important to the overall experience that people have working in the business. It makes them work better. It makes them feel better. It reduces stress. It does all the things that we've talked about.
100%. And I mean, the equation I quite like is structure plus teamwork plus trust equals insert your outcome. Right. Agility, creativity. So that structure's, but the structure on its own is dead, a bit like your org chart, right? But so you need teamwork, and teamwork can be taught. And I don't know if you've come across the flow system and Nigel Thurlow and Turner's book, which is brilliant. Goes into a lot of detail about teamworking. So teamwork can be taught and coached. And finally, trust. So how do we build those relationships that I might not be in the same cell as you or the same department as you, but Scott, you and I trust one another. I've got another gnarly problem. I'm going to pick up the phone and say, Scott, what do you guys think about this? Or what are you hearing about this? And you go, James, he's a trust agent. I'm happy. So that trust piece, and I think that is and Dave Snowden talks about this, about the sort of informal networks in organizations and almost utilizing that, particularly in the chaotic, complex domain when things are going quite, very, very unpredictably. You need that human sensor network to start activating. And if you haven't built that ahead of the crisis, you've got a lot of hard work to do.
When you're talking about helping organizations work better, what are some of the other challenges inside of organizations that are just preventing them from doing that, whether it's leadership or it's regulation or it's some other thing? But in your experience and from what you've seen, you've given us some examples of how it can work, but what are the things inside of businesses that leaders and other people who have the ability to make those kinds of changes need to look at, because it's actually preventing them from doing the kinds of things you're talking about?
Yeah, that's, again, a great question. I think there are many, many answers. It's really a very layered question, that. The thing which jumps straight to the top of my mind, and working with a client at the moment, large organization, hierarchical. And so how do you get over that power gradient between a junior and a senior person? And what you need, in my opinion, is transparency. You need honest reporting. You need the courage to say, this isn't working. You're getting these rag reports saying green, but actually it's not green, it's red. Right. But no one wants to tell you the truth, because you're the person who writes my report and gets me promoted or whatever that might be. Mm-hmm. So I think that is a problem, and that's a cultural thing. And this client I talk about is not alone, I would have thought, and doesn't have to be in the defense sector, or it could be in many different organizations. And I think that has to be a focus area. So how do you support senior people and junior people? And I think, this is not about bashing execs because they're all evil and they don't know what to about. The majority of the execs I've interacted with and I know are hardworking, decent individuals who know the problems, but there's this sort of these layers of cultural layers that are preventing them. Maybe it's they've spent years getting to where they've got to, and suddenly they kind of feel quite scared that they're giving up control or decision-making authority, or this notion of mission command, which we talk about in the military a lot, which many people know in the Agile community know, is here's what I want to do and why, but the how I'm going to leave to you, because you guys are the experts. So if you've got a senior person in an organization who's risen functionally up through the corporate ladder, they might well be an expert in a particular area they're the boss of, and so they're going, well, I kind of know the answer. So don't waste your time trying to figure out how. Just do this, and we just know how disempowering that is and demoralizing for the teams. And actually, you're cutting yourself off from innovation and creativity and different ways of working. So I think that's a mega issue. I reckon a lot of organizations face. So supporting the execs to think in a way that allows them to be an executive, yet at the same time divest the control of how work is done to where the work is done.
Oh, that's fantastic. Fantastic, and a great way to wrap up the show today. Thanks so much. So that's about all the time we have. But thank you so much, James, for being this week's Ops Innovator. It was great speaking with you.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me with you here, Scott.
Ops Innovator is produced in Sydney, Australia by 10% Labs. Our purpose is to engage thought leaders from all backgrounds, industries, and professions to explore what it takes to be truly innovative in how people and organizations work. From operating models and organizational structures, through policy and process to ways of thinking and working, it's about doing things differently and bringing the future forward to make things better now. The opinions shared by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily represent those of any organizations with whom they may be associated. If you would like to recommend someone as a future guest to share their experience and expertise, visit us at 10percentlabs.com. Until next time, this is Scott Williams, encouraging you to keep looking for ways to do things differently so you can do them better.